Welcome back to another episode of Better Than I Found It, the podcast all things college golf. You're listening to Mike McGraw, the men's golf coach at Baylor University. Let me begin by wishing you all a very Merry Christmas this week. May God's blessings be on each of you and your families as you gather during this very special time of year. Earlier this week, I was listening to an interview with Texas San Antonio head football coach Jeff Traylor, who said that his team will play this week's First Responder Bowl against FIU without 10 to 20 of their their players on their team, largely due to the transfer portal, NIL considerations, and agents discouraging many of his players from playing in the bowl game, along with coaches and agents tampering with his players. I hate what's happening with college football, is what he was quoted as saying. I truly agree with him. I agree with his sentiments, and it got me to thinking it's easy to get negative with all the negative effects of greed in collegiate sports these days. It's easy. We all fall into that trap, and I'm not saying that Coach Traylor doesn't have the right to be upset or disappointed. And one of the things he said later in the interview was, it's easy to get negative about this, but I'm going to champion the guys who are staying, the guys who are going to be playing in the bowl game. Let's talk about them. Let's focus on them. So I'm going to try to do the same here with my podcast today, although I am kind of taken aback by what's happened to our collegiate model over the last 6 years. I'm also encouraged knowing that there's still tons and tons of players out there with very high character that where it's not going to be the main thing won't be the NIL. The main thing won't be the money. But anyway, I've got 3 stories I want to share with you today, sort of as a Christmas gift to you. I want to share 3 stories of players that showed great character that played for me. All 3 remind me of the importance of recruiting character more than talent. Even though we have to recruit talent, it's very, very important, along with that, to recruit character, people that you can depend upon. The first story actually comes from my days as an assistant coach to Mark Mades at Edmond High School in Edmond, Oklahoma. Mark's teams had won state championships in 1981 and 1983. They were runner-up in the state championship in 1982 and 85, so he had probably the best program in the state. And I was helping his team in the mid-1980s. I was a junior golf director at Kickingbird Golf Course. Many of his players had come through that junior golf program, as I've mentioned on this podcast several times. But in 1986, Edmond had what could be considered the favorite team. The other 2 teams that probably would challenge for that were Enid High School, the Enid Plainsmen, and Jinx High School probably, and then also Ponca City High School, my alma mater, where I actually played high school golf. So there were several teams that could be considered potential favorites or teams that might have a chance to win the state championship. But at Edmond, we felt like we had a team that could do it very easily if we played well. The tournament was being played at Walnut Creek in the very south part of Oklahoma City. Our team included Abe Cornish, who was a defending Class 5A state champion individually, Jay DeGeer, who was a former athlete just playing golf and actually playing very well, one of our best players that year, Tracy Handcuff, Chris Childers, and Chad Kessler. So that was our 5, and we felt like that was 5 good enough players to do the job that week. And in fact, after 36 holes, Jay actually led the tournament by 8 shots. The wind blew about 45 to 50 miles an hour that day. Really tough day, and he shot some good scores and was leading. And the team, I think, had a 1-shot deficit. We were 1 shot behind Enid, I believe. Unfortunately, the next day, Jay had a really tough day, probably the pressure of trying to win individually. He shot somewhere in the low 80s. Our team did not play well. We ended up finishing 4th, and obviously that hurt, that stung, and the team vowed to come back the next year, although it would have a lot of new members on the team. Jay DeGeer and Chad Kessler and Chris Childers would all be returning, along with Gary Hart and Robert Bovair, who was a sophomore. But in 1987, the following year, we kind of committed the whole season to getting back to the state championship, and not only doing that, but to actually bring the title home the following year. It was being played at the Trails Golf Club in Norman, Oklahoma. We had played a couple of practice rounds, played well. The team was in good place, really, really in a good spot. After 36 holes, I think we were leading by 13 shots, maybe 15, but it was 13 or 15 shots. It was a big lead, and we felt really, really good. And that we actually drove home. We didn't stay in Norman. It was about an hour-long drive, so we went back to Edmond to sleep in our own beds, and then got up the next morning to head back down. And I noticed that Jay was pretty quiet on the ride back down, and he had played pretty well that day. He wasn't leading, but he was certainly in contention. And again, the weather had been really tough, high wind conditions. Golf course played really hard. And I noticed he was pretty quiet, but I didn't think much about it. When we arrived at the golf course, Jay said, "Coach, come with me." And we went and met with the head golf professional, Jim Hess. And unbeknownst to me, Jay had had a phone conversation with Jim Hess the night before. Jim was on the rules committee for the tournament that week. And what had happened was, and I'll back up to the first morning, Jay was in the final group teeing off on number 1 at the Trails. And the starter, who happened to be a golf coach at the University of Oklahoma on the women's team, she was the starter, and she literally finished the last group, started them off, and then she got in a cart and was just going to drive around and watch some golf that day. And Jay assumed she was a rules official. She was not. But Jay hit his second shot on the very first hole into the left greenside bunker, and it buried into the lip of the bunker in the sand, but buried it kind of up against the lip. And she was driving, and Jay waved her over. He just assumed she was a rules official. And he said, "Hey, I want to take an unplayable lie. How do I do this?" And she says, "Well, it's similar to any other unplayable lie. Just take it and make sure you're within 2 club lengths." And so Jay took a 2 club length drop, took a stroke penalty, but dropped the ball outside of the bunker, not knowing that if he took an unplayable lie in that bunker, he had to do it inside the bunker. But anyway, didn't give any thought about it. Went ahead and made a double bogey on the first hole. Went on to finish the 36-hole round. That night we drove back to Edmond, and Jay was talking to his dad, and he was recanting the round. His dad had not been at the state tournament that day. Recanting his round, and he told him about that first hole. And his dad said, "Jay, I'm not sure. Why don't you go check the rule book on that one?" So Jay went in, checked the rule book, and sure enough, he had committed an infraction, even though a person he thought was a rules official had given him a ruling. It was still his responsibility, and he had played the wrong ruling. And so essentially, since he had already teed off on the next hole and had not rectified it, and he went ahead and played the rest of the round, he would be disqualified. But he didn't know that. So what he did was, he did have a rules sheet, and it did have Jim Hess's home phone. Well, it may not have his home phone number. I don't know how that worked out. Anyway, Jay got a hold of Jim, and Jim said, "Well, just talk to me first thing in the morning. Bring your coach with you." So fast forward to that next morning, we're going to Norman, thinking we have a 13-shot lead. Everything's good, no issues, nothing. And Coach Mades and I are brought over to Jim Hess by Jay. And sure enough, Jay had incurred a penalty there, and since he hadn't rectified it before he teed off on the next hole, his first round was thrown out. And so we had a 6-stroke penalty, essentially, because we couldn't take his 76. We had to take another player's 82. Like I said, it was tough weather conditions. And anyway, that was kind of a stinger right there off the bat. Didn't expect it. Got the team together, Coach Mades and I did, and said, "Hey, guys, there's nothing we can do about it." Thankfully, Jay did the right thing. And I think Jay inspired his teammates that day. I think he inspired them because they knew that he would rather do the right thing and not win at all costs. He'd rather win the right way. And the team went on to win by 19 shots that day. And Jay and his teammates carried home the state championship trophy that evening. Jay went on to win the conference championship playing for Army West Point in college, and served his country, served in the Army for 6 years. Just a great example of somebody doing the right thing for the right reason. Jay wanted to win. He was a competitor like anybody else, and he knew I was a competitor. He knew Coach Mades was a competitor, but he didn't want to win in the wrong way. And I think that character and that honesty shone through, and I think when you look back at what Jay did that day, he inspired his teammates to go on and win a state championship. We ended up winning by 19 that day. The second story is about Pablo Martin. Now, many of you will know Pablo is, a great, great player. He won 3 times on the European Tour. Mike Holder, who I was an assistant coach for in the early 2000s, went over to the 2001 British Boys Championship in Ganton Golf Club. And Pablo from Malaga, Spain, defeated Rafa Cabrera Bello 3-2 in the final to become the youngest ever winner of the British Boys Championship. He came back, Coach Holder came back from that tournament and said, Coach McGraw, we got to get this kid. This kid will change our program for sure. And he's right. And actually, Mike went back 2 more years to that same British Boys, and both times with the only intent to watch Pablo. And after that third year that he had seen him, Pablo was old enough to have an unofficial visit or an off-campus contact after the tournament. Coach Holder stayed, and although Pablo's dad couldn't speak very much English, and Pablo spoke broken English, Mike Holder told him that day, he said, Pablo, I've come over here 3 straight years for one reason, and that's you. I want to bring you back to Stillwater to play golf at Oklahoma State. And that really impressed Pablo. He couldn't believe it. His best friend, Alejandro Contreras, had that very spring had won the national championship for Arizona State. And so everybody figured if Pablo wasn't going to turn pro, that he'd probably go to Arizona State. And Mike and I had recruited him. I'd seen him at the Doral and Orange Bowl for 3 straight years. Mike had seen him at the junior British Boys for 3 straight years. So it was a player we both felt we needed desperately to change our fortunes in recruiting and certainly our team. But Pablo ended up coming to Oklahoma State, and in the interim, from the time he committed, he actually led a European PGA Tour event, a DP World Tour event, after 54 holes to become the youngest player ever to lead a tournament after 54 holes. He did not win that week, but he certainly had done some things that nobody had ever seen done. When he got to Oklahoma State, his freshman year was outstanding. He won the Phil Mickelson Award as the nation's outstanding freshman. He had 8 top 10 finishes. 2 of those were victories. He just came on like gangbusters, and I was the women's coach that year, so I did not coach Pablo his freshman year. Mike Holder and Alan Bratton did, but he had a great year. And in the interim, between his freshman and sophomore years, I became the head men's golf coach. And Pablo's sophomore year, a lot of times people have sophomore slumps. It was completely the opposite. Pablo won the very first 2 tournaments of the season, the Ping Golf Week Preview and the Isleworth Collegiate. He won both of those. In the spring, he finished 3rd in Hawaii, 2nd in Puerto Rico, 2nd at the Southern Highlands Collegiate, 4th at the Hall of Fame Invitational, 8th at the Morris Williams, 4th at the Aggie Invitational, and 3rd at the Big 12 Championship. Just playing incredible golf all the way through. He was well on his way to winning the Fred Haskins Award and the Jack Nicklaus Award for Player of the Year honors. But the story that I'm going to tell you is not in regard to either one of those Player of the Year honors. It's the Ben Hogan Award, which is given annually to the best college player who also had a great amateur record. And Pablo had played great that summer before in amateur golf. I think made it to the quarterfinals of the Western and the U.S. Amateur, perhaps, maybe even finished runner-up in the. I'm not sure what his record was, but it was very, very good that summer before. Played well in some tour events as well, and just had a great, great run there, and was having the best collegiate year by a long shot of anyone. And somewhere along in that spring, I got a call from somebody on the Ben Hogan Awards Committee that said, "Hey, we just want you to know Pablo is one of our going to be one of our finalists for the award." And I asked him, I said, "Okay, that's great, that's wonderful. How does that work exactly?" He said, "Well, on whatever the date was, May 13th, it's a Saturday, all of the 3 finalists will come down to Fort Worth and participate in a bunch of activities with members and have dinner and this, that, the other, and then we'll have the award ceremony that evening." And I said, "Well, that's a problem because we are scheduled to play in the Perry Maxwell Collegiate in Ardmore that day. But I can tell you this, we can finish the 36 holes, and it's only an hour and 15-minute drive to Colonial. I'll just get Pablo in the car and be there in time for the award ceremony. And, there's no guarantee he's going to win, but they said he was certainly a favorite to win. But the problem was in order to be considered for the award, you had to be there for all of the day's activities for the entire day. And so I told the committee member that I would talk to Martin, and I laid out the specifics to Pablo, and then asked him whether or not he wanted to go to Fort Worth. His decision and his answer to me was immediate. He said, I don't want to do that. There was no weighing his options. He didn't think about what it meant as far as rankings or what it meant for the Ben Hogan Award or any of that. He didn't weigh any of that out. He just said, I want to be with my team. That's what he told me. And so I called the committee to tell them that. And I'm going to read directly from an article in the Daily Oklahoma newspaper written by Jenny Carlson. She was a columnist, sports columnist, and she writes and this was later after we won the national championship, 2 months later, she writes, McGraw asked Pablo if he wanted to be considered for the award and skip his being with his team that day. McGraw might as well have asked him to run down Duck Street in his boxers, though Martin might have been more inclined to do so. He just couldn't see why he'd want to receive an award for playing on a day when he was supposed to be playing. McGraw called to inform the committee of Martin's decision. The committee left him off the final ballot. He would have been more than a finalist. He would have been the favorite. But Martin had no regrets about his decision. Not on the day of the banquet, when he carded the Cowboys' worst score in the Maxwell. Not even when he finished outside the top 10 for the only time that entire season. His team, after all, did win the tournament. It was the start of something that bordered on magical. After winning the Maxwell, which came on the heels of a disappointing showing in the conference tournament, the Cowboys went wire to wire to win the regional title. Then came the NCAA championship. In seventh place at the halfway point, the Cowboys surged into the second after third round, and then the stage was set for some final round drama. When all was said and done, the Cowboys won the program's 10th national championship, and freshman Jonathan Moore claimed the individual crown. As for Martin, he finished fifth. Who knows what the Cowboys would have done had Martin gone to Fort Worth instead of Ardmore. Maybe they would have rolled through the postseason anyway. Maybe they would have dominated at regionals and triumphed at nationals. The beauty of this is, whatever the Cowboys were going to do, Martin made sure they went through it together. Win, lose, it didn't matter. If he was going to be part of the team for any of it, he had to be part of all of it. It's a great example that Pablo said. Coach McGraw said, gosh, you can't teach that. Jenny finished her article by saying, perhaps we could all learn from it. So I look back on Pablo's decision to disregard probably the most prestigious award in all of college golf because there was a conflict, which the Ben Hogan Award switched that and they changed that. It never was a conflict again. But Pablo, he didn't give it a second thought. It wasn't even a consideration for him to worry about an individual award when he was playing on a team. And I remember in tears, after we won the national championship, in tears, Pablo said, I've done a lot of, in an interview, he said, I've done a lot of really great things as an individual, and this game is an individual game, but I've never done anything as an individual as important as winning this national championship with my teammates. And it's 100% in my mind, Pablo's selflessness and his desire to put the team first helped us to that national championship that year. And, he went on to actually become the first amateur ever, the following year, the first amateur ever to win on the DP World Tour when he won the Portugal Open during spring break. He ended up winning 3 times all total on the DP World Tour. But when I look at it, one of the most impressive things I've ever seen out of a collegiate golfer was what Pablo did for his teammates that year and how it inspired us to go on to probably just running the tables in the postseason like very few teams have done before since. And I look back on it and I think to myself, that's character and that's selflessness. That was pretty impressive. The third example and the third story I have for you today is a more recent player, a player I had here at Baylor. You might know him as the Korn Ferry Tour Player of the Year last year. He was the Korn Ferry or the PGA Tour America's Player of the year before. Johnny Kiefer played 5 years at Baylor. He was the only player I've ever had who drove 3 hours to verbally commit. He didn't want to commit to me over the phone or in a text message. He drove all the way from San Antonio to give me his verbal commitment when he decided to be a Baylor Bear. Never had a player do that before or since. He's the only 3-time Big 12 Scholar Athlete of the Year. He was an outstanding student in our business school. As a freshman in 2020, he was All-American. He was the third-team All-American in 2022 and represented the United States at the Arnold Palmer Cup in 2022. Johnny literally, along with Cooper Dossie, who was a teammate of his for 2 years, two of the best players to ever play at Baylor. And Johnny absolutely represented Baylor in the best possible way all throughout his career. And he's gone on to obviously do great things already as a young PGA professional. I think he finished 8th in the RSM Classic a couple of weeks ago on the PGA Tour. But the story that I want to tell you is after we got back home from the 2023 NCAA Championship at Greyhawk, about 2 weeks later, I'm in between recruiting trips in my office, and I get a call from Johnny's dad, John Kiefer. And John said, "Coach, do you have a few minutes to talk?" And I said, "I did." And he said, "I just want you to know that a couple of schools have, through certain channels, have gotten information to Johnny that if he would just get in the transfer portal, if he would just be in the transfer portal, there'd be pretty substantial amount of cash, full scholarship, perhaps a car, but anyway, a nice offer to spend his 5th year, which he had committed to come back for a COVID 5th year. The moment that NCAA had said you can have an extra year, Johnny said, "I'm coming back. I can work on my master's. I can get a second major, but you can't over prepare for the PGA Tour, Coach. So I'm gonna come back if you'll have me." And I said, "I'll definitely take you." So remember, we're between his 4th year and his 5th year, and his dad is calling me to tell me that Johnny has these offers on the table. And I said, "Well, John, do I have anything to worry about?" He says, "I'm not even sure." He said, Johnny is a 22-year-old man, so Johnny's going to make his own decision. He's going to make those decisions. I have spent all these years raising Johnny. I've raised him to make good decisions, the right decisions for the right reasons. And so but I've also told him, anytime you're making a very important decision, you need to have all the information that you can possibly have in order to help you make a good decision. So I've given Johnny all the information, and I've told him, "Johnny, you make the decision based upon everything you know is important and what's right for you and what's right in general." And I said, "Okay, John, thank you for the information. I'll text Johnny and see if we can have a conversation." And so I did. And anyway, a few days later, Johnny was in my office, and he looked me straight in the eye, sitting in my office, and he said, "Coach, you've got nothing to worry about." He said, "My legacy started at Baylor, and that's where it's going to finish. I've always wanted to be a Baylor Bear, and I don't want to leave, and I'm not going to leave, and I'm coming back next year." And I think about that, and I think about I was very emotional when he gave me that information, because I thought to myself, we have a really good chance to be a good team next year. With him back, definitely. Without him, it was going to be a little bit tougher. And but the fact that he chose not to take the bait, the fact that he chose not to jump ship and leave. And I always like to ask a kid, I can't fault a kid for leaving. If somebody's going to throw a bunch of money at you, I don't know what I would have done back in 1981 if somebody had done the same to me. But the fact is, you don't. Where are you going to buy season tickets? Where are you going to come back and visit? Where is your legacy going to be? Is it at one school you spent 4 years at, or a school where you were a mercenary for 1 year and spent 1 year at that school? So I tell that story not to criticize anybody that is in the transfer portal. Not. I'm telling you that story because although these schools tampered and they tried to get Johnny to take the bait, he didn't do it. And the character it took to do that was tremendous. And it does say a lot of the parenting of John and Judy Kiefer, that Johnny made the decision to stay at Baylor. He came back. He was a second-team All-American that 5th year, finished 11th at the national championship. He ended up 25th, number 25 on the PGA Tour University standings, which got him full status on the PGA Tour Americas, which he started 2 weeks after that national championship at La Costa, where he finished 11th. And all he did was win that tour. He led the tour he had 6 less tournaments to do it than the guys who had been, because he played college golf that last couple of months before he got his status. And that was good enough to get him a Korn Ferry Tour card for the following year, where he was number 1 and Player of the Year on that tour. He's currently ranked 47th in the world. And I don't know if he's the only player to do that, to get ranked inside the top 50 without really playing the PGA Tour, the DP World Tour. He's just played developmental tours and gotten inside the top 50. I don't know if it's happened or not. Somebody ought to do some research and help me out with that. But it is nonetheless extremely impressive. But I look back on it, it's character. The character it took to look at a situation and say, no, my legacy's here. And my teammates, I'm coming back for. And 2 of those teammates, Tyler Eisenhart and Luke Dossie, came in as freshmen with him along with Scout McNeely. But they'd been there 5 years together. And the fact that Johnny came back for that 5th year, and we played very well, had a good chance to make match play the last day at Nationals. Didn't make it, but Johnny has certainly made it as he's turned professional and done very well. So there you have it, 3 stories of former players of mine who showed great character, honesty, and unselfishness. And in all 3 situations, they all 3 inspired and uplifted their teammates in the process. So the lesson for young coaches, yes, certainly recruit talent. You got to recruit talent. But always remember, more importantly, recruit character. Merry Christmas, everyone.